Now we begin a royal profile presented by a member of the royal family.
The choir of St George's Chapel, Windsor, sang Wesley's "Thou Wilt Keep Him in Perfect Peace," when in June 1972 they laid to rest Britain's last surviving King Emperor. Although for the last 35 years or so of his life, he was a stranger to these shores. In December 1936, Edward VIII did the unthinkable and chose to abdicate from his throne and give up all his responsibilities for love. Now titled the Duke of Windsor, he left the castle under cover of darkness on a road that was to lead to exile. Ever since, the private details of what really occurred then and afterwards have been guarded here in Windsor Castle. Now, with access to literally thousands of documents preserved in the Royal Archives, high up in the Round Tower, we will discover the real facts behind that fateful moment in history.
Apart from a set of coins, the odd souvenir mug and a few other memorabilia, such as this bookplate in the Royal Library at Windsor, there is little to show of the reign that should have been. I've often wondered about the appalling shock my great-uncle and namesake, His Majesty King Edward VIII, inflicted upon his family when he abdicated his throne to marry Wallis Simpson 60 years ago. Even today there are those who cannot forgive him or her for that. Rarely this century has any story become surrounded by so much myth and legend, engendered such deep emotions, and made or broken so many reputations. Which is why I want to discover what really happened during the many years the Duke and Duchess of Windsor lived alone in exile.
Fort Belvedere, just a few miles from Windsor Castle, was Edward VIII's home when he was Prince of Wales. Much of the drama surrounding the uncrowned king's fateful decision took place here. I don't believe he thought for a moment that when he decided to abdicate, he would be saying goodbye to all this forever.
The Duke honestly believed that after the abdication he could go away for a while, lie low and wait for the storm to blow over. And then he could return to here, pick up the threads of his old life, and pretend to be a younger brother to the new King, George VI. But he completely failed to understand the impact his decision to abdicate and to marry Wallis had on British and imperial opinion. And this was the essence of the tragedy, for it was to bring him into direct conflict with everyone, from the government to the man in the street, and most seriously of all, his family.
It's difficult now to comprehend the state of shock in which the nation and empire were left when King Edward decided to abdicate, a man most people had come to know and love when he was the charismatic and popular Prince of Wales. He was born in 1894, the eldest son of George V and Queen Mary, christened Edward Albert Christian George Andrew Patrick David, but known to his family as simply David. When he acceded to the throne in 1936, he became emperor to a quarter of the world's population. But his affair with Wallis Simpson, a twice-married American, was to cast a dark shadow over all this. When the king said he wanted to marry her, Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin confronted him. A 17-year-old secretary overheard them.
Baldwin was really crying, and he said, you must not go. You must not abdicate.
A few hours ago,
But he did.
I discharged my last duty as king and emperor. And now that I have been succeeded by my brother, the Duke of York, My first words must be to declare my allegiance to him.
I was a schoolboy at a prep school, and we were taken into the to the big hall in the school, and we listened to the Duke give his speech, and a lot of us were in tears. I mean, we were appalled. It was very, very moving. I'll never forget it. And we felt lost, we felt deprived, because all of us loved him. I mean, all of us looked up to him and thought that he was going to be a great king. I mean, he was sort of on our side, as it were.
I think you have to remember, sir, that he was the first member of the royal family who really came down to the people. And England couldn't believe that their beloved monarch was leaving them. For about 24 hours, we feared that such was the hurt to the nation, they might suddenly become a republic.
Not only had Wallis Simpson been divorced once, she would have to divorce for a second time to marry the king, hence the crisis.
I think it's quite difficult to understand now how powerfully people felt about that kind of thing. I mean, really powerfully, and I think the war removed quite a bit of it, not all of it, but quite a bit, because so many more people were divorced and emerged at the end of the war, married to somebody else.
We never really blamed him. We blamed her for everything. The whole thing rather stank to us, you see. And of course, divorce wasn't so common as it is now, but she had 2 husbands before, which we thought was quite enough.
Wallis Simpson certainly inspired strong feelings.
Intense loathing, sir. Loathing that I very much fear she could have been murdered. She was supposed to be the femme fatale.
Who knows how Wallis must have felt? She'd been handed out of the country just days before the abdication. She too was now in exile, staying with friends in the south of France, surrounded by the world's press. Wallis is often depicted as hard, ambitious and grasping. There were other much worse descriptions flying around as well. But at one point she must have realised what was going to happen, what she might be responsible for, and she tried to stop Edward.
In a statement to the press just 4 days before the abdication, she stated her readiness to withdraw forthwith from the unhappy situation. She was distraught when the king telephoned her with the news of his decision.
We all know that she was terribly upset and that she cried on the telephone because he told her that I'm leaving now. I've told him that I'm abdicating. And that's when it was an utter shock to her because she did not expect it. She started to cry and she said, "Oh no, please don't do it. You fool, you fool."
Nowhere was the abdication to have a greater tragic consequence than for the royal family. The children had developed a close bond through mutual support because their parents had always been remote and aloof from them.
The true story of what really happened is here in the Library and Royal Archives at Windsor. Private letters, memos, telegrams, financial papers. They tell a story of sorrow and anger, romance and tragedy, and much personal pain, not only to the Duke, but also to the family he was leaving behind. Although they were stunned by the abdication, they showed genuine sympathy for the Duke.
The Duchess of York, soon to become the new Queen, wrote,
"We are all overcome with misery and can only pray that you will find happiness in your new life."
And from his cousin, Princess Marie-Louise,
"It is impossible to express what I feel for you in this hour of such momentous decision. Goodbye, David, my dear cousin and beloved sovereign."
His aunt, the Countess of Athlone, wrote,
"Now that you are leaving us all, I want you to know how profoundly I grieve and how miserable I am for you. May your decision lead you at long last out of all this tragedy to that happiness which you've been seeking and never finding these many years."
That the high and mighty Prince Albert, Frederick, Arthur, George...
But such private sympathies were suppressed in the face of overwhelming public opinion against Wallis and the mounting advice to distance the Duke.
By the grace of
It
God...
was totally impossible for people to react in any other way than they did. They all took this strong establishment view. What he did was unforgivable, whatever that may mean, except it does mean quite a lot. A major, visible dereliction of duty. I think as simple as that.
To many, it was also a betrayal of trust. The officials of the royal household in particular felt disillusioned. Their first concern was to protect the monarchy. For that, they had to restore the public's confidence and to establish the new king, George VI, in the nation's affections, and distance the old one as far as possible. The impact of that on the brothers and family was to be profound. Immediately after the abdication, the Duke headed for Austria. Here he was oblivious to the emotional backlash against him in Britain. He fully expected to return home with Wallis and have her accepted by his family. In the meantime, he would have to wait in Austria while she would remain in France until her divorce was finalized.
The telephone was the principal means of communication both between Britain and France, and within 3 months he'd run up a bill of £800. Although there are no records of what was exchanged, we do know that the connections were never particularly good and the calls were often strained and frequently caused much pain.
He was very much the elder brother of your grandfather and your uncles. And he therefore rather felt he must tell his brother all the pitfalls and all the things he must do, which were not obviously quite well received.
It was principally to end this ordeal that the king turned to Walter Monckton, a trusted friend of both he and the Duke, to act as a mediator. It was a role that was to involve Monckton in a number of delicate missions.
He had to go over to the Duke and say, please, is it necessary to call your brother so often? Because he was not a very strong man, and it upset him.
This constant interference with state matters did nothing to improve his relationship with officialdom. May 1937 saw the coronation of George VI on the same day that had been planned for Edward VIII. The Duke was not there. He was making plans for his wedding in June and naturally expecting his family to support him on what he regarded as the most important day of his life. In France, head over heels in love, he was blind to the emotions that were still running high. It was decided after much pressure from Lord Wigram, the King's acting private secretary, to take the unprecedented step to deny the Duchess of Windsor the title Her Royal Highness.
With a great deal of anxiety, I said, I very much fear, sir, that His Majesty has not been pleased to grant the title of Royal Highness to the Duchess of Windsor. It came to His Royal Highness as a shock from the blue. It completely shattered him. And although he was not a man ever to show his emotions greatly, he then, much to my embarrassment and distress, burst into tears on my shoulder. And all he said was, well, Dudley, you'll always consider she's worthy of it, won't you?
The legal position probably was that she was entitled to it. But the view was that she certainly shouldn't get it, nor did she. And I think that was obviously something he minded very much.
And there was worse to come. Not a single member of the royal family attended the wedding.
I don't think that any of his close family had an intention of going there. I think he must have been deeply disappointed. I think there's no doubt that he hoped they would come, either all, which was perhaps not unreasonable, or at least some, which he certainly thought was reasonable, and they didn't.
The king wrote him a long and painful letter.
I can't treat this as just a private family matter, however much I want to. I'm afraid it will not be possible for any of the family to come out to your wedding. I simply hate having to tell you this, but you must realize that in spite of the affection which there still is towards you personally, the vast majority of the people of this country are undoubtedly as strongly as ever opposed to a marriage which caused a King of England to renounce the throne. It would be regarded as condoning all that's happened, and would be harmful to the monarchy. This is a matter where I can't act like a private person, and I've had to get advice from ministers.
My parents never talked about it. My mother was very buttoned up and reticent about that kind of thing. If I ever, so to speak, heard them say anything about it, they always stopped when I appeared. And I think that was very much a family view at the time.
The excuse of potential damage to the monarchy was the official line. King George, in trying to balance the family's private feelings with the public attitude they were being advised to adopt, had unwittingly started a war. The Duke felt his wife had been insulted by his family, and he blamed his brother George and his mother, Queen Mary. After the reception, Monckton took the Duchess aside. He warned her that the Duke's happiness for the rest of his life would alone reconcile the British people to his choice of her. She is reported to have replied, "Walter, don't you think I've thought of all that? I think I can make him happy."
He deeply, deeply loved her, and that he felt this was the part of his life that he could not give up.
She had a tremendous sense of humor, and she had a lot of energy, and she kept things going, and it was enormous fun around her.
The Duke had found in the Duchess of Windsor his mother, his nurse, and his wife all at once. But he behaved like an adolescent.
I have to tell you, I honestly think she really made his world. Made his world. He loved her. He told me that she was the only person that really, truly was fond of me and took care of me and loved me. That's how he fell in love with her, he told me. Because he said he never had much love in his life as a young man. I'm sure he would have been a different man if he'd had a lot of love from his mother and father.
He gave me a present which I think you would like to see. The interesting thing about it is what's written inside.
It says, "For dear David, from his affectionate parents," and it's got G-R-I and M. Yes, not exactly very personal.
Can you imagine that? A birthday present to his son. And his father calls himself Rex Imperator.
The final straw came with the unveiling of this tomb to the Duke's father in March 1939. Almost a year earlier, the Duke had written to his mother, Queen Mary,
"I hope that when the statue is finished and formally unveiled and handed over to St. George's, that contrary to the practice of avoiding all mention of anything that could recall one to the public mind, an exception will be made in this case, and you will let it be known publicly that I have shared with you the privilege of giving the memorial."
It was actually dedicated in the presence of the King and Queen, Queen Mary, and other members of the royal family. Even though he had paid half the cost, the Duke wasn't even told the ceremony was taking place. He was furious.
"I greatly regret that it should have taken so sacred an occasion to disclose so much that is unpleasant, and to destroy the last vestige of feeling I had left for you all as a family."
The incident was a culmination of all these events and actions, plus rapidly deteriorating communications, intransigence, perceived slights, and most significantly, long and painful months of negotiation over a financial settlement.
As with many a family, it was money that caused the real trouble. The initial agreement was that the Duke would receive £25,000 a year from Parliament, worth 20 times that in today's terms, and he agreed to sell Balmoral and Sandringham, which he owned, to his brother. In the event, Parliament refused to pay up. Then it was discovered that the Duke actually had £1 million in the bank, worth 20 million today. And finally, they couldn't agree a fair value for the royal estates.
The result was a wrangle that lasted nearly 2 years. It was finally resolved when the King agreed to pay £21,000 a year out of his own resources, half of which would come from the sale of Balmoral and Sandringham. The whole sorry escapade left a nasty taste in the mouth. The new king was forced to borrow to keep the estates, because he had not inherited the traditional income of a Prince of Wales.
The financial impact on the royal family's private resources was disastrous. Money that would normally have been inherited by a new king disappeared with the Duke of Windsor, and King George started with virtually empty coffers.
The Duke's inability to understand his brother's position, public opinion, and the fact that you can't have two kings in one country made conflict almost inevitable. All these factors and events combined to produce one of the major elements of the tragedy, the breakdown of relations between the Duke and his family. They inevitably blamed Wallis, who became even more despised, which made it all the more difficult for the Duke to return. Yet, he continued to remain optimistic, especially about his prospects for a job.
To those who knew the Duke well, the issue of a job was uppermost in his mind from the moment he left the country.
Exactly as Monckton had feared, boredom and alienation were to become the Duke's worst enemies. The novelty of being married was short-lived, and soon he was craving for company, for political conversation and mental stimulus.
It should have been in everyone's interest to keep him occupied, or at least well-advised, but nothing happened. Undoubtedly, there was nervousness, since during the short time he was king, he had acquired a very bad reputation. The red boxes that contain the state and confidential papers were often found unlocked and papers littered around his study, which gave rise to rumours that he, or at least Wallis, was a security risk. So when no job was offered, the Duke took the initiative himself. In October 1937, he accepted an invitation from Hitler to visit Germany.
If you have been the Prince of Wales and Edward VIII, you're a little bit apt to think, even though you've abdicated, that you still have that kind of power. He did believe that if he saw Hitler face to face, that he would prevent him from making war. Next, it was not going to be possible for Duchess of Windsor ever to experience a state visit. On the other hand, this invitation we had allowed her to experience that.
The Duke and Duchess visited Field Marshal Goering at his home.
When we were touring the whole house with the Feldmarschall, we came to his study, and behind his desk was a marquetry map of Europe, with the whole of Europe in one kind of brown, and Great Britain into a lighter greeny kind of brown, which immediately His Royal Highness appreciated the innuendo and turned round to the Feldmarschall and said, that is impertinent.
Finally, the Duke and Duchess went to meet Hitler.
When we arrived, to the Duke's surprise, Hitler refused to talk to him direct in German, because of course the Duke was fluent in it. He took great pains to put to Hitler all the arguments, which were very many, that war couldn't pay. And we were only there, I remember, so for half an hour, and he left with great distress. He failed.
It was an ideal opportunity for his enemies to declare him pro-Nazi, and the image of the Duke waving his arm in the air in what looked suspiciously like a Nazi salute was to stick with him.
The press has said that Hitler told the Duke of Windsor that in certain eventualities he would place him back on the British throne. Now that is completely untrue. Had even that been said, such was His Royal Highness's devotion and loyalty to his brother, I knowing his character as I did, he would have walked out straight away in rage. It was one of those press inaccuracies that, alas, did both he and the Duchess great harm.
So, I mean, do you believe that the Duke ever collaborated in any way or sympathised with the Nazis?
No, sir. He was a very, very loyal British subject.
But the visit showed a serious lack of judgment and did nothing to help his cause back home.
You're really enjoying this, aren't you? Well, you can enjoy 50% more of it now. Night-night.
With your next extra value meal, you'll get a McDonald's Euro 96 soccer match game card. There are over 5 million prizes available. You can win instantly. Or simply collect the halves until you find a matching pair. Yeah! In this game of 2 halves, anyone can score.
And the next gripe is...
Know-it-all neighbours, Brian. Mine will insist that she told me about surf.
Surf?
Yes, it's biological, stain digesters. That's why I switched from my high-price powder, she'll say.
Don't follow.
I do.
It works at low temperatures and it costs you less. And what's more, if you're not completely satisfied, Lever will give you your money back.
How'd you do that? Sorry?
Yes? Well, why not just move house?
With Cheltenham and Gloucester mortgages, there are no valuation fees, no application fees. They don't insist you buy their buildings and contents insurance. They don't sell endowment policies. In fact, their mortgages have absolutely no strings attached. But what's really exceptional is that they come with up to £7,500 in cash as a gift. And because C&G mortgages are also available at Lloyds Bank, they're even easier to get hold of. Ring 0800 333 900 and see how Cheltenham and Gloucester is run to make you richer.
Most leading engineers are very secretive about what inspires them to build a better car in the future. And the engineers analyzing this new Accord have every reason to be secretive, because they didn't build the car. Honda did. The new Accord from Honda, as others are finding out, it's built without compromise.
Impulse 02.
New Summer Fruits Viennetta. Smooth ice cream between layers of refreshing tangy fruit crisp. Summer Fruits Viennetta. New from Walls.
Someone can give you 3 for the price of 2. Who always gives you 3 for 2 offers on a wide range of toiletries? Boots. Impulse 02.
By 1938, the Duke and Duchess had gravitated towards the French Riviera, the playground of the rich and famous in the south of France, which was also the home to many other exiles.
It was here that the Duke and Duchess acquired their first home, La Croix on the Cap d'Antibes. What a stunning place it must have been, with its glorious setting with a fabulous view. And here they spent much of their life, entertaining and being entertained, until this idyll was rudely interrupted by the outbreak of the Second World War.
The Duke was caught unawares, still wanting to believe that war was avoidable and indeed unlikely.
After an absence of nearly 3 years, the Duke of Windsor is back in England. His Royal Highness crossed from France with the Duchess in a destroyer, landing at Portsmouth, where they were welcomed by the Commander-in-Chief before leaving for this house in Sussex.
War brought 2 positive outcomes. He was allowed to return to Britain and he was given a job. But his wife was still not accepted. The job was back in Paris with the British military mission, where his contacts might be valuable in helping to ascertain France's military capacity and intentions. He began enthusiastically, but it became obvious to him that his reports were not read, and he felt there was a campaign against him. He tried to get back to England to complain, and wrote to Monckton,
"The recent exposure of a network of intrigue against me makes my position here both impossible and intolerable. The nature of this latest campaign of outrage against me is so virulent that I wish to seek both yours and Winston's advice before seeing the King."
To Churchill, now in the War Cabinet, he complained bitterly of
fresh evidence of my brother's continued efforts to humiliate me.
But Churchill took a surprisingly tough line, no doubt fed up with his constant selfish complaining.
Having voluntarily resigned the finest throne in the world, and having been for so many years Prince of Wales and afterwards King Emperor, it would be natural to treat all minor questions of ceremony and procedure as entirely beneath your interest and your dignity. At a time like this, when everybody is being ordered about, and millions of men are taken from their homes to fight, it may be for long years, and many others ruined, it is especially necessary to be dependent in one spirit against extreme misfortunes.
Frustrated once again, the Duke became disinterested and disheartened. News of this reached Berlin, their interest aroused by loose talk at the Windsor's dinner parties. In May 1940, Germany invaded France and advanced on Paris. The Duke immediately took the Duchess to Biarritz, and when he returned to Paris, his commanding officer told him to go south, which he did, but in the process abandoned his friend and equerry, Fruity Metcalfe. Metcalfe was less than impressed.
My position here since you left has been impossible, and one I cannot stand. I have not had one word from you, sir, and so can only surmise that you intend to stay where you now are. I'm sorry, sir, to leave your service, but I feel sure that it's the only thing to do.
Metcalfe later insinuated the Duke had deserted, and though not true, the story took root. It's indicative of how he managed to alienate even his closest friends. June the 10th, 1940, Mussolini declared war and Italy invaded France. The Duke and Duchess were having lunch with Maurice Chevalier when news came, and as the border with Italy is only 30 miles away, they had to get out, and fast. France was in chaos. Paris was abandoned and the Germans were racing south towards Bordeaux. The Windsors hurriedly packed and hid everything while making hasty escape plans for the local consul general. They decided not to make for Bordeaux, where the remnants of the British embassy were escaping from, but to head for Spain. It was a decision that was to involve the Duke and Duchess in the most bizarre episode of their lives. There were refugees everywhere, and the roads were blocked by barricades. But French soldiers recognized the Duke as the Prince of Wales, who had served in the Great War, and let him through. The best route was along the coast towards the Pyrenees and the border crossing into Spain. Thousands of others had the same idea. The road was packed with refugees with their possessions, fleeing from the invading armies. Making for neutral Spain was a risk. There was no guarantee they would be let in, and at Perpignan, 10 miles from the border, they were turned away by the Spanish consulate, who refused them the entry visas they needed. All transport was at a standstill, so there could be no going back. The Duke sent off telegrams to the British ambassador in Madrid and the Spanish ambassador in Bordeaux, who were friends of his, and at last permission to cross the frontier was granted. At the border there was even more chaos.
The Duke said, it was absolutely terrible. All these people with little pieces of paper in their hands were running up and saying, if I don't get across the border, I'm going to be killed. And I said, well, sir, didn't it occur to you that, now you and the Duchess were not going to be killed, but these people were? He said, why? I was the King of England.
After 4 days on the road, the Duke and Duchess arrived in Madrid and, with relief, made for an old haunt, the Ritz. But now in a fascist regime, they immediately became the focus of political intrigue.
Nosotros con Hitler teníamos unas relaciones difíciles.
We had a difficult relationship with Hitler because he was a difficult man. But we always wanted our relationship with Germany to be a good one. For us, of course, Germany represented an important barrier against the Russians, which was the principal reason for our friendship with the Germans.
the German ambassador in Madrid was ordered by Berlin to try to keep the Windsors in Spain. They were constantly watched by the German Secret Service based opposite the Ritz at the Palace Hotel. As it turned out, the Germans needn't have bothered. The Windsors' intention to catch a boat back to Britain from Portugal was delayed because they didn't want to be in Lisbon at the same time as his brother, the Duke of Kent, who was on an official visit. The Duke of Windsor used the opportunity to start arguing for terms and conditions for his return to Britain. The British government wanted the Duke to come back at once, but he wanted a job and official recognition of his wife first. Meanwhile, his prolonged stay encouraged the Germans to enlist Spanish help to keep him where he was, in Spain. They approached the Spanish Minister of the Interior and brother-in-law to General Franco, Serrano Suna.
Franco y nosotros nos gustaba que estuviera aquí Eduardo VIII.
They wanted to keep the king here, the King of England.
Porque era bueno para nosotros.
Franco and all of us wanted to keep him here because we thought that he would be an English king more favorably disposed to Spain.
No eran demasiado cariñosos para nosotros, y él lo sería. Por eso nos interesaba a nosotros.
On the other hand, Hitler thought he could manipulate him like a pawn, so he could instigate a revolution in England.
Para ir a Inglaterra y armar una revolución en Inglaterra apoyando a Eduardo VIII contra el sistema inglés establecido.
Meanwhile, in London, His Majesty's government is becoming twitchy. The Duke's behaviour in negotiating terms before he will even consider returning to England seem, under the circumstances, extraordinary. But there he is, demanding a job for himself and acceptance of the Duchess by the royal family. Churchill fires off a telegram ordering the Duke to return in no uncertain terms.
Your Royal Highness has taken active military rank, and refusal to obey direct orders of competent military authority would create a serious situation. I must strongly urge immediate compliance with the wishes of the government.
The Duke did not receive the telegram then, because he was already on his way to Lisbon. There, the British Embassy advised him to stay with Ricardo Espiritu Santo, a wealthy banker whose home was at the appropriately named Boca do Inferno, or the Jaws of Hell, for Santo turned out to be a German sympathizer. Having had no reply to his earlier telegram, Churchill seeks an audience with the King. The Duke must be removed from the continent, but how if he won't return to England? It's decided to send him to the Bahamas as governor, a post without precedence for a member of the royal family. The Duke's attempt at bargaining had totally backfired, and he was now to be sent further into exile.
whatever you get up to Kellogg's Cornflakes.
Oh, I can drive you right round the bend, Beanaloo. All those places the bleach don't reach. You got to keep them clean and fresh too, you know. Pop a little blue block in. Oh, it does the trick time and time again. In fact, I wouldn't spend a penny on anything else. Go berserk. Pop a blue in your loo.
Tell me one good thing about your bank.
I can get cash wherever I go.
Yes, Miss Elliot, your card's good at over 7,000 cash machines.
First Direct, 24-hour telephone banking.
Packed with carbohydrates and 7 of the essential vitamins, every bowl of Kellogg's Cornflakes is a bowl full of sunshine. So whatever you get up to Kellogg's Cornflakes.
On one of his almost daily visits to the British Embassy in Lisbon, the Duke received Churchill's latest telegram informing him of his appointment as Governor of the Bahamas. He was dismayed at the news, but nevertheless accepted. At least as a governor's wife, Wallis would now be his equal. So began a new round of negotiations, including the release from military duty of some of his former staff. Most significantly, he was stuck in Portugal until a boat passage could be arranged. When Hitler's foreign minister Ribbentrop heard that, he hatched a bizarre plot codenamed Operation Willy to lure him back to Spain. Angel, a Spanish secret agent, was sent to the Duke with a message.
Últimamente, el último día, o sea, el penúltimo día.
I took a letter for him, which was given to me by the Minister of the Government, Mr. Serrano Suñer. He didn't tell me who the letter was from, or what it was about. But from the envelope, and everything I knew, it was from Franco. The Nazis told me to tell him that when the war was over, we would make him King of England, and we would put the crown on his head and the swastika on his car. When I told him, the Duke laughed a lot.
Operation Willy now effectively commences. The aim is twofold: to delay the Duke from leaving for the Bahamas and to persuade him to return to Spain.
The real aim of the plot was the negotiated peace between Great Britain and the Nazis. And then behind there was a condition which could be the recovering the crown for the Duke of Windsor.
The Duke is unaware of these machinations and plays perfectly into the hands of the plotters when he seeks their assistance to recover various items, including sheets and pillowcases, from his houses in France.
With Europe engulfed in war, the Windsor's preoccupation was bed linen for Government House in the Bahamas. The plotters allowed their maid to travel unhindered through German lines and all the way into occupied Paris to get it. But at the Windsor's home at 24 Boulevard Suchet, she was picked up by 2 overcoat-clad men who held her there and stopped her from catching the return train. The plan was to force the Windsors to postpone their departure. Meanwhile, the Duke and Duchess entertained in Lisbon while they waited for their bed linen and a boat. They were now surrounded by spies, reporting any hint of disloyalty, such as a claim that the Duke said that if the Germans bombed London, the British would capitulate. The Duke still found time, though, to play some golf, even presenting a trophy at the Estoril Golf Club.
Meanwhile, the Duke's negotiations with London continue. Churchill telegrams,
I regret that there can be no question of releasing men from the army to act as servants to your Royal Highness. Such a step would be viewed with general disapprobation in times like these, and I should ill serve your Royal Highness by countenancing it.
So from all the evidence, it appears the Duke was naive and impressionable. Much of the negotiation was absurd in content and smacks of extraordinary selfishness. Now, it's quite possible the Duchess was behind much of it, not out for revenge, but out of an absurd sense of loyalty, persuading him not to be pushed around by officials and bureaucrats. And, without any sense of proportion, he would dig his toes in over remarkably petty issues.
Walter Monckton advised Churchill to soften his line and allow one man to be released from the army to join the Duke's staff. But seemingly trivial arguments over staff hid much greater concerns in London. The breaking of German military codes within the first year of the war gave Britain an unexpected but highly delicate intelligence advantage. On the one hand, they knew exactly what was going on in Spain and Portugal. On the other, the government couldn't act in any way that might reveal their knowledge to the Germans. The crunch came when the Duke wrote that it would be more diplomatic to sail on August the 8th instead of August the 1st.
This causes real panic here, because it's clear the German plot is working. Churchill immediately sends Monckton to Lisbon on what he later describes as another very odd job.
Monckton's task was to counter whatever the plotters were saying. In fact, they were trying to convince the Duke that the British Secret Service was out to assassinate him. The Germans sent a letter offering him safe passage to Spain. It was delivered by Angel.
Yo ya vi que era la carta de Franco, pero
The Duke, he took it and looked at it. He read it first, quickly, and then more slowly, and said, "It's too late. It's too late."
bien detenidamente la cogió, la miró y dijo demasiado tarde. Demasiado tarde.
In a last desperate bid, the plotters tried new tactics. A gang of thugs was sent to the house with instructions to frighten the Duke into asking for protection.
He did persuade the Duke in the end, but it was very hard. He had to almost walk up the steps to the ship to get him on. He thought of every excuse, you know, and he, couldn't he come back and do some work in England? Couldn't he? To just be something to help the war effort. And my father had to say no.
At 6:40 on the evening of August the 1st, the SS Excalibur sailed from Lisbon, with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor safely on board and en route to the Bahamas at last. There is no doubt that in London the picture created by all the intercepted messages between Germany, Spain and Portugal must have been deeply worrying. On their evidence alone, it would be easy to brand the Duke a traitor, if you disregard the fact that they were written by fascist agents who would say anything to impress their masters. But was the Duke willing to cooperate with the Spanish and the Germans?
Of necessity, when it was strictly necessary, not of his own free will.
He thought, like many English, that the war was lost. And for the sake of England, he maybe was looking for a negotiated peace with the Germans. I think he never tried to cooperate with the Nazis, and of course he never tried to become I would say, the British Pétain.
The Duke had been badly treated in England by his friends and family, and by everybody, because they couldn't understand him. He was a man who said to me that for him there was only one thing in the world. For him, life began and ended in England.
The extent of Operation Willy first became known just after the war, when some German Foreign Ministry documents known as the Marburg Papers were captured. There was immediate speculation about the Duke's willing involvement in the plot, which he swiftly denied. But the allegations that he collaborated with the Nazis, or even considered betraying his country, continued to be made. There are even claims that secret documents pertaining to the Duke's association with the Nazis
were removed from Germany on the express orders of King George VI and have been destroyed or buried somewhere. In fact, they were all private family letters between Queen Victoria and her eldest daughter, who'd been married to Kaiser Frederick. The concern was that they might be looted. None of them was dated after 1901 and certainly don't refer to the Duke of Windsor. The Duke may have been awkward, selfish, and intransigent to deal with. He may also have been loose-tongued and in favour of appeasement. But there is no evidence that he would have ever betrayed his country or agreed to be a puppet king. Such accusations were only directly levelled at him after he had died, when he could no longer defend himself.
Being sent to the Bahamas for the Duke was like Napoleon being sent to St. Helena. It was, for him, the equivalent of being sent into exile. The only consolation was that Wallace would be treated as his equal as governor's wife. But it was small comfort that he was going to have to sit out the war, frustrated at not being able to help his country in a more constructive way. All along, he must have dreamt of returning to Britain.
What life when you've been king of a large country? I mean, how could you own practically half the world and then suddenly be told you're going to look after a tiny, tiny place at the Bahamas? I mean, he thought it was terrible, but my father was pleased because he was worried that the Duke might easily be shot or caught or anything might have happened.
It's rather sad because it was rather like being given a bicycle after having had a Bentley.
The governorship of the Bahamas was his biggest test. The impression he created would be vital.
I first met the Duke on board the yacht Southern Cross, which belonged to a Swede who had loaned his boat to bring the Duchess. She had a toothache, and she never liked to fly, and so she came in this yacht, which was very, very comfortable.
The Duchess and I are naturally very glad to set foot in America again, although it is pretty tough on her to have to undergo a dental operation.
I remember very distinctly a very small, very sunburned little man said, "Ah, you're the consul from Jacksonville. How very good of you to come on board," you know. And I was quite disarmed by this approach. He had tremendous charm and charisma. I thought he did a very fine job as the governor. He didn't spend an awful lot of time in the office, but he didn't like the office. He didn't like paperwork. But he was very popular with the Bahamians.
I mean, obviously the big question is if he did well as the governor of the Bahamas, why was it that he didn't get a job after that?
I don't know. I think it was difficulty about Wallace, really. She just didn't fit in somehow.
The Windsors' friendship with Swedish financier Axel Wenner-Gren was another cause for criticism. Suspected as pro-Nazi, he was blacklisted by the American and British governments, although the accusation was unproven. And then there was another major setback.
He had an appalling accident, let's face it, in the Bahamas when this very visible murder of a very known citizen was there, and that can't have been easy to handle and possibly wasn't well handled.
The Duke's reputation as governor was almost destroyed by the lurid murder of Sir Harry Oakes, who was found battered to death in July 1943. The Duke made the mistake of summoning help from the Miami police, who bungled their investigation so badly that no murderer was ever convicted.
I think that was a minus mark, not a plus mark. And I suppose the establishment, who decided or recommended people for the rather important kind of job he might have had, I suppose they were not only doubtful about him, but they were more than doubtful about her. They didn't like her. They didn't fancy an American voice as one of the voices of this country.
the 20,000-ton American troopship Argentina, as I saw her anchored in Plymouth Sound, within sight of the shores of Britain. Aboard her were the Duke and Duchess of Windsor on their way to France. The Duke has come back from the United States, wanting a job and hoping to find a permanent home. In answer to a question I put to him, the Duke said, "I'm coming back to England in the early part of October."
At the first opportunity, once the war had ended, the Duke resigned his post and made his way via America back to Europe. His dream was probably to return here to his beloved Fort Belvedere, his former home and the place where many of the crisis meetings prior to the abdication took place. But this dream, along with his hopes of a job and acceptance of his wife by his family, were to be dashed.
The Duke has made it plain that the present move to Paris has nothing permanent about it. He is set on bringing his wife to his homeland and to a home of their own.
The Duke's expectations remained wildly over-optimistic. In reality, he was never to see Fort Belvedere again. And it was to be a few more difficult years before he became resigned to the inevitable, that he was not to be given a job, that his wife would never be accepted by his family, and that he would not be allowed to live in Britain permanently. In the end, he accepted that he was an exile. As it turned out, once they became reconciled to this fact, the Duke and Duchess set about creating a lifestyle and image that was to make them one of the most alluring icons of the 20th century. In the next programme, I'll be investigating the enduring enigma that was their life in exile.